All right, ready to dive deep into criminal investigations. We've got this super interesting document on forensic techniques. It's like a guide for investigators, and it's packed with stuff we got to unpack.
Yeah, it's really fascinating. It's not just about tools and tricks, though.
Right.
It's like it gets into the investigator's head, shows how they connect the dots and build a case,
Okay, I'm putting on my detective hat right now. Let's kick things off with something we all use, our cell phones.
Good place to start.
It's crazy how much info they spill without us knowing.
Seriously, mind-boggling. The document actually starts with cell phone investigations. Those digital trails we leave
Oh, yeah?
can totally crack a case wide open.
So hold on.
The first chapter's all about the specific procedures they gotta follow.
Okay, so it's not like those TV shows where they just pinpoint a location on a map.
Not that easy. It emphasizes understanding the laws around this data for public and private entities, too.
Makes sense.
It's a big deal accessing someone's cell phone data.
Right, it's their privacy.
Exactly.
So investigators have to be super careful following the law.
All the time, yeah. The document stresses that, cell phone evidence has to meet these standards to even be used in court.
Oh, so there are rules for that.
For sure.
Got it.
So investigators, they got to know those rules of evidence and follow the procedures perfectly, every single step.
So it's this balance, right? You got this powerful tech to solve crimes, but also got to respect people's rights.
Absolutely.
And the evidence has to actually hold up in court. It even mentions South Africa's RICE legislation.
Right.
Where everyone has to register their SIM cards. How does that impact things, do you think?
It's a double-edged sword.
How so?
Well, having that database, of registered SIM cards can be a big help to identify people, track down suspects.
Makes it easier.
Way easier. But, it does raise concerns about privacy, right?
Oh, of course, yeah.
Potential misuse, all that.
Big issue.
It is. No easy answers.
Definitely something to think about. It's like even our phones, right?
Yeah.
Simple little things have these huge implications for crime and justice.
They do.
All right, let's move on to something else we see a lot in crime shows, confessions. What happens when a suspect, confesses? Or maybe points out a key piece of evidence?
That's where things get interesting. There's a whole chapter on that in the document: admissions, confessions, pointing out procedures, the whole shebang.
So wait, it's not as simple as someone just saying, I did it.
Nope.
There's more to it.
Way more. The document really hammers home the importance of understanding the laws around pointing out procedures.
Okay, so there are specific guidelines.
Very specific.
Got it.
They have to be followed to the letter.
That makes sense.
Because everything needs to be done by the book, totally voluntary, no coercion, documented super carefully.
Oh, so if there's any pressure, it's no good.
If there's even a hint of pressure, manipulation, that evidence,
yeah,
gone, thrown out of court.
Wow, so it's about protecting their rights.
Absolutely.
Even if they might be admitting to something.
Even then.
That's wild.
The document highlights how important it is to know those legal requirements for pointing out procedures inside and out. Every step.
I bet.
From informing the suspect of their rights to getting that consent documented.
Sounds intense.
It is, and this applies to both public and private investigations.
Both.
Yeah, but the rules, they might be a little different.
Okay, so different context.
Different context, yeah.
It's like this tightrope walk, right?
Totally.
Gathering info, but also upholding the law and protecting rights.
It's a balancing act, for sure.
Now, the document also talks about modus operandi.
Yes, MO, the criminal's signature, basically.
Right, their methods.
Exactly. This chapter really focuses on defining what MO actually is.
Okay, why is that so important?
Well, because it often gets mixed up with motive or criminal profiling, you see.
Oh, I could see how that would happen. So it's not about why they did it, but how they did it.
Exactly, and it dives into how those specific actions, those signature behaviors,
yeah,
can be used by investigators to connect the dots between different crimes.
Oh, wow.
Or even predict what a criminal might do next.
That's incredible. Are there any specific examples?
Think about it. The document mentions trademarks, right? Specific behaviors they repeat, tools they prefer.
Okay, yeah.
Types of victims they target.
Got it.
So like a burglar who always goes for houses with a certain type of security system.
Oh, interesting.
Or a thief who only steals a specific kind of artwork. By looking at those patterns,
yeah,
investigators can start building a profile, narrow down those suspects.
It's like a puzzle.
It is, like a puzzle. You're putting it together one little trademark at a time.
So even small details.
Huge clues.
Wow, this document is blowing my mind.
I know, right? It makes you think differently about investigations.
Okay, one last thing I've always been curious about surveillance. Is it really like in the movies? Hidden cameras and all that?
Well, the document tackles surveillance head-on, starts with a basic overview.
Okay, good.
What it is, the different types, the whole deal.
Makes sense.
It stresses how important it is to understand both the practical side and the ethical side. The considerations that go into using those surveillance techniques.
Because there's that line, right, between getting evidence and someone's privacy?
There is a very fine line. It highlights all these different types of surveillance physical observation, electronic monitoring, and stresses that you got to know the implications.
Legal and ethical.
Both, yeah, for each technique.
So knowing the rules.
The rules and regulations.
Making sure everything's done right.
Lawfully and responsibly.
Now let's talk about those controversial polygraph tests. Do they actually work?
The polygraph, a classic and a source of so much debate. The document dives deep into that murky water, explores the legality, the benefits, the limitations, all of it.
So is it like they strap you to a machine and know if you're lying?
Not that simple. It outlines those rules and precedents that govern their use. They aren't foolproof, not at all. And whether that evidence can even be used in court?
Yeah.
Debatable. Lots of debate.
So it's more about understanding the nuances, the potential problems, and like how to interpret those results.
You got it. It encourages critical thinking about polygraph testing.
Got it.
Separating fact from fiction, understanding its roles.
Or lack of role.
In the legal system.
This is making me question everything I thought I knew about investigations.
That's good. That's good. Before we move on, there's one more thing in this section.
Okay, what's that?
Managing these investigative institutions, not just the field work, but the whole structure, the processes.
Right, the behind-the-scenes stuff.
Exactly. This chapter goes deep into how they're managed.
Makes sense.
Highlights this crucial element, human resource management, both strategically and operationally.
So getting the right people.
The right people with the right skills, yeah.
And managing them well.
That's it. It also stresses the importance of clear policies and mandates.
So there's structure.
Structure and accountability, yeah.
Keeping everyone ethical.
Exactly.
So clear guidelines, strong ethics, that kind of thing.
That's it. It's all about setting the framework for those institutions to function properly.
This deep dive is really opening my eyes. It's not just about catching bad guys.
Nope.
It's way more complex.
It is. It is. It's about all these systems and procedures and ethical stuff all working together. It's fascinating. Ready to dive deeper?
Lead the way. Okay, let's get specific about cell phone data in investigations. Like, how do investigators actually use this stuff? To track someone down or figure out what happened.
Well, the document, it gives a great breakdown of how the whole cell network actually works.
Oh, okay.
Which is important, right, to understand how investigators can get that data.
Right.
It might surprise you to know that our phones, they're constantly talking to the network.
Really?
Even when we're not using them.
So, like, even if my phone is just in my bag, it's doing something.
Yep. It's like a little beacon sending out...
A beacon.
Yeah, so the network knows where it is. It's called registering with cell towers.
Oh, interesting.
And all that creates this trail of data points.
Okay, so it's like leaving digital breadcrumbs.
Exactly. And those breadcrumbs can be used to retrace someone's steps.
Even if no one saw them.
Even if there's no other evidence, they can see which tower is a phone connected to and when.
Wow.
And that creates this timeline of where the phone's been.
That's kind of scary, but also amazing.
It is. Now, there's this key player, the Mobile Service Switching Center, MSC.
MSC, okay.
Think of it like the brain of the network. It manages all the connections, the data flow, everything.
So that's where all the logs, timestamps, location data, it's all there.
All in the MSC, a gold mine for investigators.
I bet.
But, getting that data isn't a walk in the park. There are legal hurdles, warrants, all that.
Right, to protect people's privacy.
Exactly. And as we talked about before, South Africa's got that RICE legislation.
Right, with SIM card registration.
That adds a whole other layer to it, regulating how investigators can get and use that data.
Makes sense. So it's not just knowing where a phone's been. The document talks about the signals themselves, right?
It does. It gets a little technical here.
Oh, okay. This is where I might get lost.
I'll keep it simple. Think about it. The strength of the signal, it can actually tell you roughly how far a phone is from a tower.
So, like, if I have full bars, I'm close to a tower.
Exactly. And by looking at the signal strength from several towers,
yeah,
investigators can actually pinpoint a location pretty accurately, like your phone's GPS, but with towers instead of satellites.
That's wild. Okay, shifting gears a bit, the document also gets into admissions, confessions, pointing out procedures. When a suspect gives up some info verbally or by doing something.
Right, right. It stresses that investigators got to be super careful in these situations.
Yeah, like on TV, you see people confess all the time.
Right, but any pressure, any hint of coercion makes that confession useless in court.
So it really has to be their own free will.
100% voluntary. The document gets deep into those legal requirements for pointing out procedures.
Okay, there are rules for that too.
Oh, tons. Like, the suspect has to know their rights.
Right.
They have to consent, and everything needs to be documented.
So it's like walking a tightrope.
It is.
Getting the info, but protecting their rights at the same time.
Exactly. And there are different provisions for public versus private investigations.
Different contexts again.
Exactly. It emphasizes that you got to understand those nuances if you're in law enforcement or the legal world.
So much to think about. Okay, let's talk about that criminal mind stuff, modus operandi. I'm really fascinated by that whole idea, like criminals leaving a signature.
It's like their fingerprint, but for their actions. The chapter starts by really defining MO.
Okay, why is that so important?
Well, because people confuse it with motive or criminal profiling.
Oh, yeah, I can see that. So it's not about why, it's about how.
Exactly. And it goes into how MO can be shaped by all sorts of things.
Like what?
Their skills, resources, background, even their psychology.
So a tech-savvy burglar might go for houses with fancy alarm.
Exactly. And understanding those connections can help investigators predict what a criminal might do next.
Wow.
The document talks about trademarks, those specific things criminals do over and over.
Those telltale signs.
Exactly. So noticing a burglar always uses a certain window or a robber uses a specific phrase.
Could be a big clue.
Huge. It's like learning to read the language of crime.
Wow. Okay, switching gears again. What about surveillance? The document mentions all these types, from watching someone to using electronics. What's important to keep in mind where they're doing that?
The document really stresses careful planning. It's not just about following someone.
Right, you can't just tail someone without knowing what you're doing.
Exactly. Investigators need the right training, the right equipment, and they gotta be following the law.
Of course, if they break the law to get evidence, it's no good.
Exactly. The document talks about different goals of surveillance, like gathering info, protecting witnesses, even stopping a crime before it happens.
Okay,
And it gets into the legal side, too, the laws and regulations.
so they don't overstep.
Exactly. It's about finding that balance, doing your job effectively, but not going too far.
Sounds tricky. What about choosing who does the surveillance?
Well, it says you have to think about their skills, experience, even how they look.
Oh, right, so they blend in.
Exactly. And then there are the different techniques. Vehicle surveillance, that can be intense.
Like a car chase.
Not always, but it's about following someone without being seen.
Sounds stressful.
It can be. For bigger areas, they might use helicopters even.
Wow, like in the movies.
Sometimes, yeah. Then there's electronic surveillance using listening devices, cameras, that kind of thing.
So tapping phones, hidden cameras.
That, again, you got to be super careful with the legal stuff. You can't just do that without good reason and the proper authorization.
Right, that's someone's privacy. Okay, let's talk about polygraphs. Do those things really work? I mean, can they really tell if you're lying?
The document's really upfront about this. It says polygraph, they don't actually detect lies.
They don't.
Nope. They measure your body's reactions, blood pressure, heart rate, sweating. The idea is that when you lie, you get stressed, and that shows up.
So it's about those physical changes.
Exactly. And the examiner, they have to be trained to read those signs correctly.
I bet.
The document talks about how important the legal side is, there are rules for using them, and whether they hold up in court.
Yeah.
Always up for debate.
So it's not a perfect system.
Not at all. It also mentions things that can make the test unreliable.
Like what?
Medical conditions, being upset, even just being tired.
Wow, so lots of factors.
Lots of factors. But even with all that, they can still be helpful.
Really, how?
Well, the document says they can be used to get more info, check if someone's telling the truth, maybe even find new leads.
So more about guiding the investigation than being proof.
Exactly. Now, ready to shift gears again, this next part is about how these investigative institutions are managed. It's not all about field work, you know?
Right, there's got to be a system behind it all. I'm especially curious about those big investigations, the ones with lots of moving parts.
Well, the document goes into that. It starts by talking about human resources.
So getting the right people for the job.
Yeah, recruiting them, keeping them, training them, making sure they have what they need to do their job well.
That makes sense. And I bet there are rules and policies too.
Absolutely. The document emphasizes that. Clear policies and mandates, accountability, ethical behavior, that whole thing.
Right, so no one goes rogue.
Exactly. For those complex investigations, it talks about communication, collaboration, using resources well.
So everyone's working together.
Working together towards the same goal.
Got it. What about leadership? Is that important?
Very important. The document stresses that. You need a good leadership to keep everything on a track.
Makes sense. What about keeping records of everything?
Documentation, super important. The document lays out what kinds of reports they need,
Okay.
what should be in them, how they're used to track progress, analyze findings, all that.
So creating a clear record of what happened.
Exactly. And that can be super important in court or for internal reviews.
Makes sense. What about when there are disagreements or problems?
Yeah, the document even covers that. Managing conflicts, handling complaints, making sure things stay fair, and the investigation stays on track even when things get heated.
Sounds complicated.
It can be. And finally, it talks about working with support systems, the forensic science lab, the local criminal record center.
So investigators aren't alone.
Definitely not. The lab provides the scientific analysis. The record center has all those criminal records, those databases.
So they all work together.
Exactly. And that teamwork can make a huge difference in solving those touch cases.
This whole document is making me see investigations in a whole new light. It's not just about catching the bad guys. It's about all these systems working together.
It is. Science, technology, human skill, it all comes together.
And speaking of science, are you ready to dive into the world of forensic science?
Let's do it.
Okay, let's get into that forensic science stuff. It's always seems so cool how they use science to analyze evidence, like putting a puzzle together, but with fingerprint and DNA and all that.
It's amazing what they can find. This document starts with imprint identification.
Imprint identification.
Yeah, those marks, impressions left at the scene.
Oh, okay, like footprints, tire tracks, that kind of thing.
Exactly. And the document stresses how important it is to protect those.
Right, because they could be damaged.
Damaged, contaminated, you name it. They're super valuable evidence. Like, imagine a burglar leaving a shoe print in the mud.
Oh yeah, that could tie them to the scene.
Exactly. It could be the cue to the whole case.
So they have to be super careful collecting that stuff. What about analyzing it? What do they do?
Well, they use everything from the classic stuff, like dusting for fingerprints, to high-tech imaging and computer analysis.
So they're using technology to see those tiny details.
That's it. It's like a magnifying glass for the microscopic world.
Wow, cool. What about those sketches of suspects? The ones they make based on what witnesses say. Is that a real thing?
Oh, totally. The document covers facial identification and reconstruction. Those sketches, they can be really helpful in identifying suspects.
Oh, interesting. So if a witness describes someone, they can draw them.
Yep. And if they find a body and don't know who it is,
Yeah.
they can use facial reconstruction to create a likeness.
So it's like putting a face on someone from the past.
Exactly. Art meets science. Okay, let's talk about the heart of forensic analysis, the Forensic Science Lab, the FSL.
The FSL, all right. What goes on in there?
The document gives you a real behind-the-scenes peek. It's this multidisciplinary place with all these departments analyzing different types of evidence.
So like a science detective agency.
Pretty much. They got the biology unit analyzing blood, hair, DNA.
Okay, that makes sense.
Then there's ballistics, looking at guns, bullets, all that.
Oh, so they can tell what gun was used.
Yep, they can match a bullet to a gun even.
That's amazing. What other unit are there?
Well, there's the disputed document unit. They look at handwriting, signatures to see if they're real.
So like forgeries and stuff.
Exactly. Then you've got chemistry analyzing substances like drugs, toxins, even paint and fibers.
So anything they find at the scene, they can figure out what it is.
Pretty much. And the document emphasizes that all these departments work together.
Okay, that makes sense.
It's a team effort. Now, let's talk about those first few minutes after a crime. What happens at the scene?
Yeah, what's important there?
Well, the document says you need a fast, effective response.
Right, so things don't get messed up.
Exactly. Those first minutes are critical for protecting evidence, finding witnesses, securing the area.
Makes sense.
They outline the first responder's role, that person who gets there first.
Okay,
They assess the situation, protect anyone who's hurt, then secure the scene.
sounds like a lot of pressure.
It is. They have to document everything, find potential witnesses, make sure nothing gets disturbed.
So those first responders are really important.
They are. What they do or don't do can make or break a case. One last thing the document talks about is training, keeping up with the latest developments in the field.
Right, because technology changes all the time.
Exactly. It says investigators have to keep learning, improving their skills. You never stop learning in this field.
Well, I feel like we've learned a lot today. From cell phone data to MO to forensic science, it's been quite a deep dive.
It has. We've really gotten a glimpse into the world of criminal investigations, how it all works, the science, the technology, the human element.
This document has been fascinating. I see investigations in a whole new light. It's not just about catching the bad guys.
No.
It's about all these complex systems working together to solve crimes and make sure justice is served.
Well said. We hope our listeners enjoyed this deep dive too. The more we understand about criminal investigations, the better equipped we are to be informed citizens and advocates for a just world.